The massive ship New Hope screamed through space like a wounded bird. Captain Robert Williams gripped the controls with both hands while his wife Keisha held their newborn baby close to her chest. The little boy had been born just hours ago, during what should have been a routine colony mission. Now everything was falling apart. The engines are gone. Robert shouted over the alarms. I can't control the descent. Through the viewport, they could see the planet Ethros Prime getting bigger and bigger. Red mountains stretched across the surface like giant teeth. But what made Keisha gasp were the creatures flying toward them. They looked like huge people with massive wings that sparkled silver in the sunlight. What are those things? She whispered, pulling the baby tighter. The winged beings surrounded the falling ship. Their leader, a proud warrior named Vex with scarred silver feathers, spoke into his communication device. Unknown vessel, you are trespassing in Valdari space. Prepare to be boarded. But Robert couldn't hear him. The ship was spinning too fast, systems failing one by one. All he could think about was his family. Keisha, take the baby to the escape pod. I won't leave you. You have to. For him. The ground rushed up to meet them. Metal screamed against rock. Fire bloomed across the crash site like deadly flowers. When the smoke finally cleared, Vex and his warriors landed near the wreckage. Search for survivors, Vex ordered, though his voice showed no hope. The twisted metal still glowed red-hot. Nothing could have lived through that. His warriors spread out through the debris. Most found only death. But then, from deep inside the wreckage, came a sound that made them all freeze. A baby's cry echoed through the broken ship like a bell. Vex followed the sound to where the escape pod had been thrown clear of the main crash. Inside, he found something that made his proud heart turn cold. A tiny human infant with dark skin and darker eyes, wrapped in a blanket that read Baby Williams. The child's parents lay still nearby, having used their last moments to shield their son from the impact. Disgusting, Vex spat. A wingless creature. Leave it here to die with the rest of its kind. But one of his warriors hesitated. Keth had always been different from the others. His left wing had been damaged in battle years ago, leaving him unable to fly as high or as fast as his brothers. The other Valdari looked down on him for this weakness. Maybe that's why the baby's helpless cries touched something deep inside him. As the patrol flew away, Keth lingered. The infant looked up at him with curious eyes, no fear in them despite everything that had happened. When Keth reached down, the baby grabbed his finger with a grip that seemed impossibly strong for something so small. Your parents called you something, Keth murmured, reading the blanket. But that name died with them. Here, you will need a new one. He looked around at the crash site, at the way the ship had carved a deep furrow in the ground. Groundwalker, he decided. You will be Groundwalker, because you will never know the sky as we do. Keth wrapped the baby in his own cloak and took off toward the mountains where the exiled Valdari lived. These were the outcasts, the damaged ones like himself who couldn't match the perfect standards of their proud race. Maybe they would understand what it meant to be different. The mountain caves were cold and harsh, but they were home to those who had nowhere else to go. When Keth arrived with the human child, the other exiles gathered around in amazement. You brought a wingless one here? Asked Vera, an old female whose feathers had gone white with age. The council will hunt us all if they discover this. Let them, Keth replied. This child has already survived what killed his entire people. Maybe there's more to these humans than we thought. As if responding to their voices, the baby opened his eyes and looked around at the circle of winged faces. Instead of crying, he seemed fascinated by their different appearances. When Vera cautiously extended one gnarled finger, he grabbed it just as he had grabbed Ketha's, holding on like he understood these strange creatures were now his family. He has a strong grip, Vera admitted with something like a smile. And brave eyes. Perhaps the wingless one will surprise us all. Over the following days, word of the crash spread through Valdari society, but the official story was simple. All humans had died in the impact, just as expected from such a weak, primitive race. No one thought to count how many bodies they had actually found. High in the mountain caves, Groundwalker took his first steps not on solid earth, but on stone shaped by wind and time. He would grow up learning the ways of beings who ruled the sky, never knowing that his own people had once ruled the stars themselves. The galaxy had forgotten about humanity. But humanity, in the form of one small boy, was about to remind them why that had been a mistake. 20 years had passed since that terrible day when fire fell from the sky. The baby who once cried in the wreckage had grown into something the Valdari had never seen before. Groundwalker stood 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and muscles that rippled like steel cables under his dark skin. His human heritage showed in ways that both amazed and troubled his winged family. While other young Valdari learned to fight in the air, Groundwalker mastered combat on solid ground. He moved like liquid lightning, his feet finding purchase on surfaces where even the most skilled Valdari would slip. When they dove at him from above, expecting easy victory, he would roll aside at the last second and strike with precision that left them stunned. "How do you do that?" asked his friend Dex after another training session. Dex was one of the few young Valdari who didn't care that Groundwalker couldn't fly. "You move like you know exactly where we're going to attack." Groundwalker wiped sweat from his forehead and grinned. "Maybe I do. You skydancers all think the same way. You see the ground as weakness, so you never expect strength to come from below." But it wasn't just his fighting skills that made the other Valdari whisper. Groundwalker could lift stones that would challenge three of them working together. He could run for hours without getting tired, crossing distances that would require flight for anyone else. Most strange of all, he seemed to understand their technology in ways that puzzled even their engineers. "The navigation crystal is cracked," old Master Zek had said one day, staring at his broken flying harness. "It will take weeks to grow a new one." Groundwalker had picked up the crystal, turned it over in his hands for just a moment, then made 3 quick adjustments. The device hummed back to life, working better than before. "How did you know how to do that?" Zek asked, his yellow eyes wide with shock. "I just knew," Groundwalker had replied, looking as surprised as anyone else. These incidents became more common as Groundwalker entered his 20th year. He could repair machines he'd never seen before. He could predict weather patterns that confused experienced skyriders. Most disturbing of all, he sometimes spoke words in a language that made the oldest Valdari shiver with half-remembered fear. The day of reckoning came during the Rite of Ascension, the ceremony where young Valdari proved their worthiness to join adult society. Groundwalker had trained his whole life for this moment, even though everyone knew he would never actually fly. The plan was simple. He would demonstrate his ground fighting skills, and the council would grant him honorary status as a warrior. The great ceremonial platform stood high above the city, its crystal surfaces reflecting the morning sun like captured starlight. Hundreds of Valdari perched on the surrounding spires, their wings creating a rainbow of colors against the sky. At the center of the platform sat the High Council, 5 ancient Valdari whose wisdom guided their entire civilization. Elder Zara, the oldest of them all, watched with eyes like chips of amber as Groundwalker approached the ceremonial circle. Her white feathers seemed to glow in the light, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries. "Young one," she began, "you have trained among us, fought beside us, and earned the respect of our warriors. But you are not of our blood, and you do not share our gift of flight. Tell us why you believe you deserve to stand as one of us." Groundwalker stood straight and proud, his voice carrying across the platform. "Elder Zara, honored council, I may not have wings, but I have proven my worth in battle. I have served our people faithfully for 20 years. If strength and loyalty aren't enough to earn a place among you, then perhaps your standards need to change." A murmur went through the crowd. No one had ever spoken so boldly to the High Council before. But Elder Zara wasn't looking at Groundwalker's face anymore. Her ancient eyes had fixed on something else entirely. "Your hands," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Show me your hands." Confused, Groundwalker held up his hands. They looked normal to him, just larger and stronger than Valdari hands, with 5 fingers instead of 4. But Elder Zara's reaction was immediate and terrifying. She stood so quickly that her chair toppled backward, her wings spreading wide in a gesture of shock and fear. "Human," she breathed, and the word hit the assembled crowd like a thunderbolt. "You are human." The platform erupted in chaos. Young Valdari took to the air in panic. Warriors reached for their weapons. But Elder Zara raised one wing for silence, and her voice cut through the noise like a blade. "I remember the old stories," she said, her eyes never leaving Groundwalker's face. "I remember the star builders, the wingless ones who shaped worlds and commanded the void between planets. I remember why they disappeared." Keth pushed through the crowd, his damaged wing making his approach clumsy but determined. "Elder, please, let me explain." "You knew," Zara accused. "You knew what he was, and you raised him anyway." "He was just a baby," Keth shouted back. "An innocent child whose parents died protecting him. What was I supposed to do, let him die in the wreckage?" "Yes." Zara's voice boomed across the platform. "Because now he knows our secrets. Now he has learned our ways. And soon, others of his kind will come looking for him." Groundwalker felt like the world was spinning around him. Human? Starbuilders? Nothing made sense anymore. I don't understand, he said weakly. What are you talking about? Elder Zara's expression softened slightly, but fear still dominated her features. Child, your people once ruled the galaxy. They built the machines that terraform worlds, the ships that cross between stars. They were magnificent and terrible, and when they vanished, every other race in the galaxy breathed easier. She gestured to the city below them, to the gleaming spires and floating gardens. This world itself was shaped by human hands, made livable by human technology. And now you're here, learning our weaknesses, preparing for their return. I'm not preparing for anything. Groundwalker protested. This is my home. You're my people. No, Zara said sadly. We never were. And now, for the safety of our civilization, you must leave. The sentence hit him like a physical blow. Exile. Cast out from the only home he'd ever known, away from the only family he'd ever had. As Valdari guards moved to escort him from the platform, Groundwalker looked back at Keth, the old warrior who had saved him all those years ago. I'm sorry, Keth mouthed silently, tears streaming down his weathered face. But as the guards led him away, Groundwalker felt something strange stirring inside him. For the first time in his life, the word human didn't sound like a curse. It sounded like a promise. The wasteland stretched endlessly in all directions, a sea of red sand and jagged rocks under twin suns that burned like angry eyes. Groundwalker had been walking for 3 days now, his water running low and his hope even lower. The Valdari had given him basic supplies and pointed him toward the empty lands where no civilized being would ever go. Let the wingless one find his own kind among the dust, Elder Zara had said coldly. But there was nothing here. Just endless emptiness and the sound of wind whistling through broken stone formations. Groundwalker's feet had started bleeding hours ago, but he kept moving because stopping meant dying, and he wasn't ready to give up yet. On the 4th day, something changed. The sand beneath his feet felt different, too smooth and too regular to be natural. He knelt down and brushed away the red dust with his hands, revealing something that made his heart skip. Metal. Not the rough, crude metal that the Valdari used, but something sleek and perfect, like liquid silver frozen in time. Following the metal surface, Groundwalker uncovered more and more of the structure. It formed geometric patterns that hurt his eyes to look at directly, shapes that seemed to shift and move when he wasn't staring right at them. And then, impossibly, he found a doorway. The moment his hand touched the entrance, everything changed. Lights blazed to life in patterns that ran along the walls like living electricity. The air itself began to hum with power that he could feel in his bones. And then, in the center of the chamber that opened before him, something appeared that made him stumble backward in shock. It looked like a person made of blue light, flickering and translucent but somehow more real than anything he'd ever seen. The figure was tall and graceful, with features that reminded him somehow of his own reflection. When it spoke, its voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. Genetic scan complete. Human DNA confirmed. Welcome home, Groundwalker Williams. How do you know my name? Groundwalker whispered, his voice barely working. Because I helped choose it, the light being replied with what might have been a smile. Your parents were Robert and Keisha Williams, both officers in the Colonial Marines. They died protecting you when their ship crashed on this world 20 years, 4 months, and 17 days ago. The words hit him like hammer blows. His parents. Real names, real people who had loved him enough to die for him. You knew them? I was the AI aboard their ship. When the New Hope went down, I transferred my consciousness to this facility to wait for rescue. I've been waiting for you, Groundwalker. I've been waiting for any human to come home. The AI gestured, and the walls around them became transparent, revealing chamber after chamber of incredible technology. Machines that hummed with quiet power, screens showing star maps of impossible complexity, and in the distance, shapes that could only be spaceships. What is all this? Groundwalker asked, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. This is who you really are, the AI said gently. Your people weren't refugees running from a dying world. They were the architects of galactic civilization. Every habitable planet in this sector was terraformed by human hands. Every star system has the fingerprints of human engineering. Even Ethros Prime, the world where you grew up, was a dead rock until your ancestors gave it an atmosphere. Groundwalker sank to his knees, overwhelmed. But if we were so powerful, what happened to us? Why are we gone? The eye's expression grew sad. Because your people made a choice. When they realized how much other species feared them, they decided to step back rather than rule through terror. They scattered themselves across the galaxy, hiding their technology and letting others believe they were extinct. It was supposed to be temporary, just until the galaxy learned to trust them again. But it wasn't temporary, was it? No. Generations passed. Most humans forgot their own history and became exactly what the other species thought they were. Primitive. Weak. Scattered. But the infrastructure remained, hidden and waiting for the right genetic signature to activate it. The AI raised its hand, and suddenly Groundwalker could feel connections forming in his mind. Information flowed into him like water into a dry riverbed. Star charts showing the locations of dozens of hidden human facilities. Population records indicating thousands of humans living as slaves or primitives across the galaxy. And most importantly, the activation codes for technology that could change everything. There's a mining world called Corvex 3, the AI explained. The insect-like creatures who run it use human slaves because they are stronger and more adaptable than any other species. A woman named Tasha Johnson works in the deep mines there, along with her twin children David and Maya. They still remember the old songs, still carry the genetic markers that mark them as true humans. You want me to save them? I want you to remember what you are. Not just Groundwalker, the exile from Valdari society. Not just a wingless freak who doesn't belong anywhere. You are human, descendant of the Star Builders, heir to an empire that once spanned the galaxy. Groundwalker stood slowly, feeling something fundamental changing inside him. For 20 years, he had defined himself by what he couldn't do. He couldn't fly like the Valdari. He couldn't fit into their society. He couldn't be what they wanted him to be. But now, for the first time, he was learning what he could do. Show me, he said simply. The AI smiled, and the chamber around them transformed. Walls slid away to reveal a hangar containing sleek ships that seemed to be made of liquid starlight. Weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. Armor that flowed like water but felt harder than diamond when Groundwalker touched it. The Valdari taught you to fight, the AI said. They taught you strategy and tactics and how to read an enemy's intentions. That knowledge, combined with human technology and human determination, makes you perhaps the most dangerous individual in the galaxy. As Groundwalker suited up in armor that seemed to read his thoughts and respond to his needs, he felt the last pieces of his old identity falling away. He wasn't just the foundling anymore, the grateful exile who accepted whatever scraps of belonging others threw his way. He was human. And it was time the galaxy remembered what that meant. The ship that carried him away from the wasteland moved like liquid lightning through space, its human-built engines making the journey to Corvex 3 in hours instead of days. As the mining world grew larger in the viewport, Groundwalker thought about Tasha Johnson and her children, working in darkness and dreaming of freedom they thought would never come. They were about to learn that sometimes, when you cry out in the darkness, something answers back. And sometimes, that something has the power to change everything. The Lord of the Stars was coming home. Corvex 3 looked like a wound in space. The mining world spun slowly under its dying red sun, its surface carved into ugly scars by massive drilling operations. From orbit, Groundwalker could see the slave camps dotting the planet like infected sores, each one surrounded by energy barriers that kept the workers trapped inside. His ship, sleek and silent as a hunting cat, slipped past the orbital defenses without triggering a single alarm. Human stealth technology was still centuries ahead of anything the insect-like Corvexians had developed. They had grown lazy, confident that no one would dare challenge their mining empire. The deep mines stretched kilometers underground, filled with tunnels so narrow that only the strongest workers could survive the crushing labor. Tasha Johnson had been working these tunnels for 15 years, ever since raiders had captured her colony ship and sold everyone aboard into slavery. Her hands were scarred and calloused, her back bent from years of hauling or carts, but her eyes still burned with the fire that marked her as truly human. "Mama, I'm tired," whispered her daughter Maya, barely 10 years old but already forced to work alongside the adults. Her twin brother David leaned against the tunnel wall, his small chest heaving from exhaustion. "I know, baby," Tasha whispered back, glancing around to make sure no guards were listening. "But we got to keep going. You remember what Grandma Keisha used to say? We bend, but we don't break." The children nodded, repeating the old words that had kept their family strong through generations of suffering. Around them, other human slaves continued their endless work, their movements mechanical and hopeless. Most had forgotten they were anything more than tools for their insect masters. That's when the lights went out. Emergency sirens began wailing throughout the mining complex as every system shut down at once. In the darkness, Tasha heard something that made her heart skip. Footsteps. But not the clicking, skittering sound of Corvexian feet. These steps were heavy and purposeful, moving with a confidence that spoke of power barely held in check. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. When he spoke, his voice carried an authority that made even the guards step backward. "My name is Groundwalker Williams," he said, his words echoing through the tunnel. "I've come to take you home." The Corvexian supervisor, a massive insect with razor-sharp mandibles, chittered angrily and raised his electric prod. "This sector is closed to outsiders. These slaves belong to the hive." Groundwalker moved faster than the eye could follow. One moment the supervisor was threatening him with the weapon. The next, the insect was lying unconscious against the tunnel wall, his prod crushed to pieces in Groundwalker's bare hand. "Anyone else want to discuss ownership?" Groundwalker asked mildly. The other guards scattered like leaves in a windstorm. Tasha stared at this impossible rescuer, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. "You're human," she breathed. "So are you," Groundwalker replied with a smile. "And so are your children. That makes us family." Over the next hour, Groundwalker moved through the mining complex like a force of nature. Every security door opened at his touch. Every weapon he picked up seemed to work better in his hands than it had for its original owners. Most importantly, every human he found began to remember something they thought they had lost forever: hope. "There are others," Tasha told him as they led a growing group of freed slaves toward the surface. "Other colonies, other worlds. The Nexus Collective uses humans as research subjects. The Valdari Empire keeps some as curiosities in their floating cities." "I know," Groundwalker said quietly. "We're going to find them all." The escape from Corvex 3 became the stuff of legend. Groundwalker's ship, now joined by stolen Corvexian transports, blazed across the system carrying over 3,000 freed humans. But more than that, it carried something that had been missing from the galaxy for too long: the knowledge that humanity was not extinct. Word spread faster than light through the underworld networks that connected the galaxy's forgotten places. On the agricultural world of Vidania, an old man named Samuel Jackson looked up from his hidden garden and smiled for the first time in decades. His people had been pretending to be simple farmers for 3 generations, hiding their true nature from the crystal beings who ruled their world. "Did you hear?" his granddaughter Nia whispered, her dark eyes bright with excitement. "They're saying a human warrior freed the mines on Corvex 3. They're saying he's looking for all of us." Samuel nodded slowly, his weathered hands touching the secret compartment where he kept the old star charts, the ones that showed where humanity's hidden facilities waited in the darkness between worlds. "Then maybe it's time to stop hiding," he said. Across the galaxy, similar conversations were happening in slave camps and hidden colonies. Humans who had spent their lives pretending to be weak and primitive began to remember what their ancestors had been. They began to organize, to communicate, to plan. And at the center of it all was Groundwalker, no longer the lost exile from Valdari society, but something new and terrifying to the established powers of the galaxy. He moved from world to world like wildfire, leaving behind empty slave camps and activated human technology. On the crystal mining station of Nexus Prime, he found Dr. Patricia Washington, a brilliant scientist who had been forced to develop weapons for her captors. When Groundwalker freed her laboratory, she looked at him with the calculating eyes of someone who understood exactly what his arrival meant. "You're not just rescuing individuals," she said as they watched her research facility crumble behind them. "You're rebuilding an empire." "No," Groundwalker replied firmly. "Empires rule through fear. We're building something better. We're building a family." But even as he spoke those words, he knew the galaxy's established powers wouldn't see it that way. The Valdari High Council was already mobilizing their war fleets. The Corvexian hive was calling for alliance with their traditional enemies. Even species that had been at war for centuries were beginning to unite against the return of humanity. They remembered the old stories too. They remembered what humans had been capable of when they controlled the stars. And they were terrified that this new human leader might decide that the time for hiding was over. Standing on the bridge of his growing fleet, surrounded by people who looked to him as their savior and their general, Groundwalker felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders. Somewhere out there, Keth was probably still living in the mountain caves, wondering what had become of the baby he had saved. The old Valdari had given him life, but now it was time to give that gift meaning. The galaxy had scattered humanity across 1,000 worlds, thinking they were too weak and too few to ever pose a threat again. They were about to learn that sometimes, the most dangerous enemy is the one you think you've already defeated. The Lord of the Stars was rising, and the universe would never be the same. The greatest battle in galactic history began above Ethros Prime, the same world where a human baby had once cried in the wreckage of his parents' ship. Now that baby had grown into something the universe had never seen before, a human who fought like a Valdari, thought like a strategist, and commanded technology that made God seem small. Groundwalker stood on the bridge of his flagship Keisha's dream, named for the mother he had never known but whose courage lived on in his blood. Around him, the command crew worked with the fluid efficiency that marked true humans. Tasha Johnson coordinated the fleet movements, her fingers dancing across control panels that responded to her genetic signature. Her twins David and Maya, now grown into skilled warriors, managed communications with human cells scattered across dozens of worlds. Through the massive viewport, the enemy fleet stretched to the horizon like a plague of metal locusts. Elder Zara had done the impossible, she had united the galaxy's greatest powers against a common threat. Valdari warbirds soared alongside Corvexian hive ships. The crystal vessels of Nexus Prime floated next to the organic warships of the Tentacle Collective. Species that had been enemies for millennia now flew wing to wing, bound together by their terror of humanity's return. "Incoming transmission," announced Maya, her voice steady despite the odds they faced. "It's Elder Zara herself." The ancient Valdari leader appeared on the main screen, her white feathers dulled with age but her amber eyes still burning with fierce intelligence. Behind her stood representatives from every major species in the galaxy, a united front that should have been impossible. "Child of the Starbuilders," Zara's voice carried across space like a pronouncement of doom. "You have awakened something that should have stayed buried. Your people ruled through fear once before. We will not let that happen again." Groundwalker stepped forward, and for a moment he wasn't the galactic warlord his enemies saw. He was just the foundling who had grown up in mountain caves, learning wisdom from a damaged warrior with a broken wing. "Elder Zara," he said with genuine respect, "you taught me that strength without wisdom is just brutality. Look around you. Every ship in your fleet flies through space because my ancestors built the hyperdrives that make it possible. Every habitable world your people call home was terraformed by human hands. We had the power to rule you all, but we chose to step back instead." "Until now," Zara replied coldly. "No. Even now." Groundwalker gestured to his own fleet, where humans and aliens worked side by side. "Look at my crew. Tasha there grew up as a slave, but she chose forgiveness over revenge. Dr. Patricia Washington could have built weapons to destroy your worlds, but instead she develops medical technology to heal them. We're not here to conquer. We're here to come home." But words weren't enough to stop what was coming. The enemy fleet began its attack with the fury of cornered animals. Plasma beams lit up space like deadly lightning. Missile swarms darkened the stars. For the first few minutes, it seemed like the sheer weight of numbers would crush the human fleet entirely. That's when Groundwalker showed them what 20 years of Valdari training had really taught him. "All ships, execute Pattern Omega," he commanded calmly. The human fleet suddenly scattered like birds before a storm, each ship moving independently but somehow in perfect harmony with all the others. Where the enemy expected rigid military formations, they found fluid chaos that was impossible to target effectively. Human vessels danced between plasma bolts, rolled away from missile strikes, and struck back with precision that seemed almost supernatural. "How are they doing that?" demanded General Crox, the Corvexian hive leader. "No fleet can coordinate without centralized command." But Groundwalker wasn't commanding his fleet in the traditional sense. He was conducting it, like a master musician leading an orchestra. Every human in his force shared a genetic heritage that included intuitive understanding of three-dimensional combat. Combined with Valdari aerial tactics and human adaptability, they became something unprecedented in galactic warfare. The tide began to turn when a familiar damaged fighter appeared among the human forces. Keth, the old Valdari who had saved Groundwalker as a baby, transmitted crucial tactical data about his own people's weaknesses. Other Valdari followed his lead, breaking away from Elder Zara's fleet to join the humans who had shown them what true honor looked like. "You're tearing our civilization apart." Zara screamed across the communication channels. "No," Groundwalker replied sadly. "I'm showing you what it could become." The final phase of the battle wasn't won through superior firepower or tactical brilliance. It was won through something far more powerful, the simple human ability to inspire others to be better than they thought they could be. Species that had been enemies for generations began working together when they saw humans treating former slavers as equals. Warriors who had known only conquest watched in amazement as Groundwalker's forces offered aid to damaged enemy vessels. When the shooting finally stopped, Elder Zara's flagship hung dead in space, its weapon systems disabled but its crew unharmed. Groundwalker could have destroyed her easily, could have made an example that would terrify the galaxy into submission. Instead, he did something that changed everything. He docked with her ship and walked aboard unarmed. "You came back," Zara whispered as she watched him approach her command deck with the same confident stride he'd had as a young warrior in her ceremonial chamber. "I never left," Groundwalker replied gently. "This is still my home. You're still my people. All of you." He gestured to the mixed crowd of aliens and humans who had followed him aboard, former enemies now standing together, united by something stronger than fear or hatred. "The new Terran Confederation isn't a human empire," he announced, his words broadcasting across the entire fleet. "It's a family. Every species, every world, every individual who wants to build something better than what we had before." The title came naturally from 1,000 different voices speaking in 100 different languages, Lord of the Stars. Not because he ruled them, but because he had shown them how to rule themselves. In the years that followed, the galaxy transformed in ways no one had imagined possible. Humans shared their terraforming technology freely, turning dead worlds into gardens. Former slave species became full partners in exploration and discovery. Even the proud Valdari learned that strength shared was strength multiplied. And in a small mountain cave on Ethros Prime, an old warrior with a broken wing looked up at the stars and smiled. The baby who had once cried helplessly in the wreckage had grown into something magnificent, not in spite of his human nature, but because of it. The galaxy had tried to scatter humanity to the winds, thinking they were too dangerous to exist as a unified force. They had learned instead that humans weren't dangerous because they were strong or smart or technologically advanced. They were dangerous because they never stopped believing that tomorrow could be better than today. And sometimes, when you believe in something strongly enough, the whole universe starts believing it too. The Lord of the Stars had come home at last.